Okay, as promised earlier, I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about creating a quote sandwich in your 102 doc specs. There are a lot of ways that you can integrate a quote into your text, and this is just something that I just like to use to kind of help you get started with the process of integrating your quotes properly in your papers. So the basis of a sandwich, obviously, is you have two pieces of bread and you have your meat or your cheese or whatever you have in the middle. And so integrating quotes properly works in the same way. You don't have a sandwich unless you have at least those three elements together. And so the meat of your sandwich is the textual information that you're dropping, your textual evidence. So once you have decided the quote that you're going to use, you're going to go ahead and just kind of stick that in the middle, just like you would your regular sandwich. And so my textual evidence, and this is from a poem, but it works the same way for short stories. It's going to work the same for drama. The basis is all the same. So I'm going to insert my textual evidence here, and it's cited properly. Again, with poems, you don't have to put the author's last name and the page number, just the page number. But for short stories, it's supposed to be the author's last name and then the page number that you find the material on. So cited properly, I've got open quotation marks, close quotation marks, open parenthetical citation. I drop in my parenthetical citation, I close my quotation marks, and then I put my period at the end. Okay, so I've got my meat, and now I've got to establish my two pieces of bread, or I'm just eating meat, right? So the top bun of your sandwich, or the top piece of bread, is the introduction. And so what you want to do is create what we call a signal phrase, and you add to that a reporting verb. Now, you can use the word says or states, but there are a lot of words that work better than saying says. Mrs. Mallard says, or Krebs says that. So I've connected to this, and you have this document in your essay resources on Canvas. I've given you some reporting verbs that you can use, and these are just kind of upgrades so that you're not using says or states all the time. I mean, you have demonstrates, you have suggest, expresses, indicates, refers to, illustrates that, depicts, interprets, examines. These are just some words that you can use that are stronger than says and states all the time. And you can also use your own verbs. It doesn't have to necessarily be one of those. But those are just maybe some ones to help you get started. And I think some of those are listed also in that doc specs document that I gave you. So a signal phrase plus the reporting verb. So my author of my story, my author of my poem in my example here is Dylan Thomas. So Thomas urges his father to. So that's my signal phrase plus my reporting verb, which in this case is urges. Or the author argues that man should not merely accept death, but should. And once I stick that top piece of bread on top of my meat, it flows directly into my textual evidence. So Thomas urges his father to rage against the dying of the light. Or the author argues that man should not merely accept death, but should rage against the dying of the light. Great. I've got my introduction. I've got my textual evidence. And now I need an explanation. And that's my bottom bun, right? That's my bottom piece of bread that I want to put together to make my sandwich whole, because it wouldn't be a complete sandwich if it didn't have that other side. So Thomas's choice of vivid language sets the tone of anger and frustration at his father's inability to fight against death. What I've done there is I've just explained my signal phrase and reporting verb and that textual evidence in the context of what I'm writing about. So altogether, the author argues that man should not merely accept death, but should rage against the dying of the light. Thomas's choice of vivid language sets the tone of anger and frustration at his father's inability to fight against death. Period. Done. That's basically a CTE on a really smaller scale. If you think about it, I've got part of my claim, I've got my textual evidence, I've got my explanation, and I'm smashing them together in what I like to call a quote sandwich. So if you you get stuck, refer back to this. It will help you. It'll help you structure and embed your quotes better than just dropping them in without any explanation. And it also serves that dual purpose of explaining your quotes as you kind of go along, instead of dropping your quotes in, dropping a quote in, dropping a quote in, and then explain. So as long as you're doing it like this, you're going to have properly formatted quotes, and you're going to have an introduction and an explanation for each of the quotes that you put in. So remember, though, that explanation has to connect back to the overall thesis of your paper. So make sure that you address that within your explanation so that the reader can follow that thread all the way back up to your thesis or your claim, which is in the introductory paragraph.